In the quiet of Mengo Hospital, the clock had just passed midnight. Nurse Ruby was struggling to stay awake at her desk, her eyelids drooping as she fought against the weight of her own tiredness. Suddenly, the soft sound of the automatic doors sliding open made her lift her head. A young woman stumbled in, clutching her stomach tightly. Her face was pale, and her steps were unsteady. Ruby's heart skipped a beat as she quickly stood up, hurrying toward the woman, whose eyes were filled with terror. "Please, help me," the young woman whispered, her voice weak and trembling. She leaned against the wall, barely able to hold herself up. Ruby reached out, guiding her gently to a chair. "Are you all right?" Ruby asked, her voice filled with concern. "What happened?" The young woman tried to catch her breath, but fear seemed to lock her words inside. I can't explain," she said, her voice shaking. "You need to get the doctor. Please, it's better if you just see it." Ruby glanced at another nurse nearby, and they exchanged a worried look. Without another second to lose, Ruby picked up the phone and dialed Dr. Catherine, the doctor on duty that night. Dr. Catherine was in her office, looking over some patient files, calm as always. But something in Ruby's voice broke through her usual composure. "A patient just arrived," Ruby said, her voice urgent. "She's in a bad way and insists you come now." Dr. Catherine put down her file, grabbed her stethoscope, and headed quickly to the lobby, her footsteps quickening with each step. When Dr. Catherine reached the lobby, she saw the young woman sitting with her head down, her body hunched as if it was too heavy to hold up. She walked over, kneeling beside her. "Hello, I'm Dr. Catherine," she said gently. "Can you tell me what's wrong?" The woman looked up, her eyes filled with fear and exhaustion. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You just have to see it." I don't know how to explain." Dr. Catherine could feel the fear in her words. She nodded, helping the woman to her feet. "All right, let's go to the examination room." Once inside the examination room, Dr. Catherine guided the woman onto the examination table. She noticed how tightly the woman was holding onto the edge, her hands trembling, her face pale. "Try to take a deep breath," Dr. Catherine said softly. "What's your name?" "Rebecca," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Rebecca, I'm going to examine you, all right?" Dr. Catherine said calmly. "Can you show me where it hurts?" Rebecca swallowed, hesitating before she pointed to her lower abdomen. It's down there," she said, her voice filled with shame and fear. "Please, doctor, just take a look." Dr. Catherine gave a reassuring nod and began the examination. But as she took a closer look, her heart skipped a beat, and she stepped back, her face showing shock. She had not expected to see this. Tiny white maggots were moving in the most sensitive part of Rebecca's body. The sight was horrifying, and for a moment, Dr. Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. She had seen many things in her career, but nothing like this. Rebecca's face twisted in pain, and she reached out, grabbing Dr. Catherine's hand with a grip that showed her desperation. Tears streamed down her face as she started to sob. "Please, doctor, help me. I don't know what's happening to me. I'm so scared. I don't want to die." Dr. Catherine took a deep breath, steadying herself. She met Rebecca's tear-filled eyes, giving her hand a comforting squeeze. "Rebecca, I'm here to help," Dr. Catherine said softly. "I need you to trust me. We're going to get through this, but I need you to stay strong, okay?" Rebecca nodded weakly, her tears still falling. Dr. Catherine gently administered an injection to ease Rebecca's pain. Then, with great care, she began to clean the affected area, moving slowly and reassuring Rebecca with every step. She could feel the fear in the young woman's grip, her hand never leaving Dr. Catherine's, as if that touch was the only thing keeping her grounded. As she worked, Dr. Catherine's mind filled with questions that would have to wait. Right now, the only thing that mattered was easing Rebecca's pain. Her quiet sobs filling the small room as Dr. Catherine continued her gentle work. In the silence, the doctor and her patient held on to each other, bound by an unspoken promise to face whatever came next, together. In the dim morning light filtering through the hospital room, Dr. Catherine sat across from Rebecca, her eyes filled with compassion and concern. She had spent the night doing everything she could to ease Rebecca's pain and clean her wounds, but something about the whole situation had left her deeply unsettled. She took a breath, steadying herself before speaking. "Rebecca," Dr. Catherine began, her voice gentle but serious. "This condition, it's very unusual. I've done what I can to relieve the pain for now, but I need to know more about your history. When did you first notice that something wasn't right?" Rebecca wiped away the last of her tears, her hands trembling slightly. She took a moment to gather herself, the shame and fear clear on her face. "It started about 5 days ago," she whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. "At first, it was just a strange smell, something I couldn't get rid of no matter how much I tried to clean myself. Then, the discomfort started, and after that," she paused, her voice cracking, "I saw the maggots. They wouldn't go away. No matter what I did, they just kept coming back." Dr. Catherine listened intently, nodding slowly as she processed Rebecca's words. "Did you change anything recently?" she asked. "Any new medication, different food, or even new soaps or toiletries?" Rebecca shook her head. "Nothing out of the ordinary," she replied, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I'm a student, and I stay alone. I'm careful with my hygiene. I thought maybe it was just something temporary, but it kept getting worse." Dr. Catherine's face softened, sensing Rebecca's growing distress. She decided to tread carefully, knowing the next question might be delicate. "Rebecca, are you sexually active?" she asked gently. Rebecca hesitated, a blush creeping over her cheeks, but she nodded. "Yes," she said softly. I was with my boyfriend, David, about a week ago." Dr. Catherine's mind raced, piecing together the timeline. "So, it was after you were with David that you noticed these symptoms?" Rebecca nodded again, her expression troubled. "Yes, I didn't think it had anything to do with him, but now I just don't know." Dr. Catherine leaned forward, choosing her words carefully. "Rebecca, I need you to think about your relationship with David. Has anything about him changed recently? Has he been acting differently? Or has he mentioned anything unusual?" Rebecca's face grew sad as she thought about her boyfriend. "David has changed," she said, her voice filled with sorrow. "He used to be so kind, so gentle, but recently, he's been hanging out with different people, wealthy men who have money and power. He keeps saying he wants a better life, that he's tired of being poor. I hardly recognize him now." Dr. Catherine's brow furrowed, sensing there was something more, something lurking beneath the surface. "Rebecca, I want to help you," she said softly, her voice firm yet caring. "But I need you to tell me if there's anything else about David that might explain this. Anything unusual, even if it seems strange." Rebecca looked down, twisting her hands in her lap as she struggled to find the words. He's been talking about wanting more from life. It's like he's not himself anymore, like he's chasing something I can't understand. But he hasn't done anything strange. At least, not that I know of." Dr. Catherine watched Rebecca's troubled face, her own thoughts darkening. She'd heard whispers of stories, of people who became entangled in dark rituals for wealth and power. It sounded impossible, but what she had seen tonight defied everything she understood as a doctor. The next morning, still shaken, Dr. Catherine made her way to Dr. Sophie's office. Dr. Sophie was a senior gynecologist, known for her expertise with rare and complex cases. If anyone could shed light on this, it would be her. Sitting across from her, Dr. Catherine described everything in detail, her voice quiet and uncertain. "I know this sounds strange, but it felt different, almost as if it were beyond medicine. I can't explain it, but it's like something mystical is happening here." Dr. Sophie leaned back in her chair, her face thoughtful. "This does sound disturbing," she admitted, her eyes narrowing as she considered Dr. Catherine's words. "Over the years, I've heard stories of people who suffer from unexplainable conditions because of supernatural influences. Sometimes, it involves those closest to them." Dr. Catherine's breath caught, a chill running through her as Dr. Sophie's words sank in. "Are you saying this could be something beyond the physical?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Sophie nodded slowly. "It's possible. Rebecca mentioned her boyfriend, David, right? If he's involved in something dark, he might have unknowingly brought this upon her. Dr. Catherine felt a mixture of disbelief and fear. She had spent her life in medicine, relying on science, but now she was faced with something that defied all logic. She had no choice but to consider every possibility, no matter how unusual. Later that day, she returned to Rebecca's room, her expression soft as she sat beside the young woman. Rebecca looked at her with red-rimmed eyes, her face still filled with fear. "Rebecca," Dr. Catherine said gently, reaching out to hold her hand. "I need you to be completely honest with me about David. If there's anything unusual about him, anything that might have changed, it could help me understand what's happening to you." Rebecca looked down, her shoulders slumping as she tried to find the right words. "I don't know, doctor," she whispered. "David was just lost, I think. He wanted a better life. He kept saying he'd do anything to escape his poverty. But I didn't think he'd. I don't know." Dr. Catherine squeezed her hand, her gaze filled with sympathy. "I believe you, Rebecca, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you. But we need to understand if there's more to this. If David is involved in anything unusual, we need to know." Rebecca's lip trembled, her hands gripping Dr. Catherine's tightly. "I don't know what's happening, doctor. I'm scared. I don't want to die." Dr. Catherine's heart ached as she watched Rebecca's fear. "You're not alone in this," she said softly. "We're going to figure this out. I promise." Rebecca sat across from Dr. Catherine, her gaze fixed on her trembling hands. Her voice wavered, barely above a whisper as she began. "I met David last year, when things were hard. We were both scraping by, just trying to make it through each day." Dr. Catherine leaned forward, her eyes gentle, silently encouraging her to go on. "He understood," Rebecca continued, her voice thick with emotion. "He came from the same place, same struggles, same dreams. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. I thought we were. I thought he cared." A pause hung in the room as Rebecca struggled to compose herself, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her chair. "But things changed," she whispered. "About 3 months ago, he started spending time with these new people. They were flashy, powerful. At first, I was happy for him. I thought maybe he'd found a way out for both of us." Dr. Catherine tilted her head. "Did they seem dangerous to you?" Rebecca swallowed, nodding slightly. "There was one night," she murmured, her gaze distant. "He came back late, and his eyes, they were different. Cold, like he wasn't even the same person. He told me he was done with being poor, that he'd do whatever it took to get ahead." The words lingered in the air, heavy and raw. Dr. Catherine studied her with a steady, compassionate gaze. "Rebecca, I know this might be difficult, but I believe David may be involved in something that's affecting you too. If you're willing, there's a way we might find answers." Rebecca's eyes lifted, searching Dr. Catherine's face for a hint of understanding. "What do you mean?" A brief silence, then Dr. Catherine explained. "Call him. I want you to speak to him like everything's fine. Act casual. See if he lets anything slip. And if you sense he's lying, push him. Make him angry. Sometimes the truth comes out in anger." Rebecca's hands tightened, the anxiety coursing through her. But she took a deep breath, determined. "If this is what it takes, I'll do it." With trembling fingers, she dialed his number. As the phone rang, her heartbeat seemed to echo in her ears. Then, David's voice drifted through the line, calm and unbothered. "Rebecca, didn't expect you to call." She swallowed, steadying her voice. "Hi, David. I just haven't been feeling well. I thought maybe you'd know why." There was silence on the other end, then a low chuckle, hollow and unnerving. "Rebecca, don't be absurd. If you're feeling sick, just get some rest." Her heart pounded, but she pressed on. "David, this all started after last week. I don't understand, and I thought, maybe you could explain." An icy tone cut through the line. "Rebecca, you're asking too many questions." She gripped the phone tighter, desperation bleeding into her voice. "If there's anything I should know, please tell me." A heavy sigh crackled through the line, followed by his voice, sharp and impatient. "Fine. You want the truth? I got tired of being a nobody. You were just convenient. Some of us want more out of life, and for that, sacrifices have to be made." Rebecca's breath hitched, a cold shock freezing her in place. Sacrifices? David's laugh was like a knife twisting in her chest. Nothing personal, Rebecca. You were useful. Some of us need to do what it takes. As his words sank in, her heart shattered. Dr. Catherine placed a hand over hers, a silent show of support. In that quiet, Rebecca finally understood. David's love, his promises, his warmth, they'd been nothing but an illusion. She'd been nothing but a means to an end. Rebecca ended the call, her fingers still gripping the phone. Her eyes widened, and her chest heaved with shock. The world around her felt like it was closing in, and the reality of David's betrayal sank in deeply, a cold ache twisting her stomach. Dr. Catherine watched her closely, a gentle but resolute look crossing her face. She realized that Rebecca's troubles weren't something medicine alone could cure. Without a word, she placed a comforting hand on Rebecca's shoulder and led her out of the hospital. Together, they walked down the dim corridors toward a waiting car. The journey was quiet, filled with unspoken fears and a growing sense of urgency. They arrived at a small, peaceful church where a soft light glowed from inside. Pastor Joseph stood by the altar, a man with a calm yet commanding presence. He listened as Rebecca, with tear-streaked cheeks and a trembling voice, recounted her nightmare. She spoke of the changes in David, the words he'd spoken, and the terrifying realization that she had unknowingly been part of something sinister. Pastor Joseph's face grew solemn as he absorbed her words. When she finished, he spoke softly, "Rebecca, you are caught in the midst of a ritual, one that David performed without your consent. You have 5 days left to live, but there is hope. There's a way to break this darkness." Rebecca's face paled. 5 days. Her voice was a mere whisper, full of despair. "Please, Pastor, I'll do anything. Just tell me what I need to do." He nodded, his eyes filled with kindness. "Rebecca, God's power can break any chain. Tonight, begin praying with all your heart. Open to the Psalms, especially Psalms 35, 91, and 109. They are prayers of protection and deliverance. Pray at midnight, when your voice will rise strongest against the darkness." He placed a hand on her shoulder and prayed over her, his words filled with strength and comfort. Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling warmth seep into her, a gentle reassurance that calmed her racing heart. That night, back in her hospital room, Rebecca sat cross-legged on the cold floor, the Bible open in her lap. She took a deep breath, steadied her trembling hands, and turned to Psalm 35. In the quiet, her voice began softly, "Contend, Lord, with those who contend with me. Fight against those who fight against me." The words felt heavy yet soothing, like an invisible shield wrapping around her. She moved to Psalm 91, the verses filling the room with an energy she couldn't describe, but one that made her feel safe, protected. As the clock struck midnight, her voice grew stronger. She poured her heart into Psalm 109, her soul reaching for hope, for life, for freedom. In the days that followed, Rebecca's strength slowly returned. The strange afflictions faded, her pains dulled, and a lightness she hadn't felt in weeks began to fill her. Dr. Catherine and Pastor Joseph, who had been checking on her daily, exchanged hopeful glances, marveling at the power that seemed to be working within her. Finally, when she was able to leave her bed, Rebecca returned to Dr. Catherine's office. A newfound resolve sparkled in her eyes. "I want to go to the police," she said firmly, clutching the small recorder tightly in her hand. The confession David had unknowingly left her was her proof. She felt a sense of purpose. Dr. Catherine nodded, offering her a supportive smile. Together, they went to the police station. Rebecca handed over the recording, her heart pounding as the officers listened. David's words filled the room, each phrase a testament to his intentions. The investigation began immediately, and a team was dispatched to track him down. When they arrived at David's apartment, they found him in a haunting state. He sat outside on the cold steps, his clothes disheveled, his eyes empty and wild. He muttered to himself, fragments of sentences tumbling from his lips, broken pieces of a mind that seemed lost. The officers approached cautiously, restraining him as he continued to babble, his words incoherent and haunted. Rebecca watched from a distance, a sense of eerie closure washing over her. The darkness he had embraced had turned back on him, consuming him from the inside. She took a shaky breath, realizing she had been freed, not just from the curse but from the weight of betrayal. After several days of observation, Rebecca was finally discharged from the hospital. Before leaving, she found herself back in Dr. Catherine's office. Sitting across from her, a small smile of gratitude lit her face. "I don't know how to thank you, Dr. Catherine. You saved me." Dr. Catherine reached across the desk, placing her hand on Rebecca's. "You saved yourself, Rebecca. You were strong enough to fight, to seek help, and to trust. You found the courage to face the truth." Rebecca nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. "I never thought I would survive this. After everything David did, the lies, the manipulation, I trusted him with everything, and he betrayed me in the worst way." Dr. Catherine's gaze softened. "Betrayal runs deep, but it doesn't define who you are. You are resilient, and you have a future ahead of you, one filled with hope, healing, and purpose." A calm settled over Rebecca, and she realized she truly did feel different, as if a heavy weight had finally lifted. There was a peace she hadn't known for a long time, a quiet joy of having survived the storm. In the weeks that followed, Rebecca resumed her studies, her steps lighter, her heart freer. The past felt distant, a memory that no longer haunted her, but a lesson that had shaped her. She found herself spending more time in prayer, drawing closer to God, realizing she had been given a second chance, a gift she would never take for granted. The case against David proceeded. His mental state remained erratic, and he was transferred to a psychiatric hospital, where he would stay until he was well enough to face trial. The officers assured Rebecca that justice would be served, and her life would no longer be shadowed by the darkness he had unleashed. Rebecca continued her journey with quiet determination. Each day, she walked forward with newfound strength, a clearer sense of purpose, and a heart that had healed from the hurt of betrayal. She kept close contact with Dr. Catherine, who had become more than a doctor to her. She was a friend, a guide, someone who had walked with her through the valley and helped her find her way out. Rebecca embraced her future, ready to reclaim the life she had fought so hard to protect, filled with hope and gratitude for the second chance she had been given. If this story resonated with you, and you're looking for more uplifting and inspiring tales, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Together, let's explore stories that highlight the incredible strength of the human spirit and the blessings life brings. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I'm excited to share more stories with you in the next video. Remember, embrace the positivity around you and believe in the incredible beauty of life. Let's keep inspiring one another.